As you can see in the program, we have 4 presentations in this session. And the session is actually entitled Looking into Future Market Fundamentals. So we have presentations on projection, merging biophysical and economic modeling by Robert Mbarak. And then we have another presentation by Harold Whiskey from Humboldt University. And the third one is on food secure and interdisciplinary research project to explore the future of food and nutrition security by Hans van Mejil. And then the last one is by Nicolas Francis. And this one is looking at European farming in a world of volatility. I will start with the first presentation, and maybe the rest of you could be sitting. If you want, you can sit at the table. Stay.
Okay, good afternoon. I know you all tried to escape the presentation. It's already 45 minutes late, but I hope that we have some interesting things to show you so that you also can wake up and participate. Actually, the microphone, but it is on.
Yeah.
Do I have to take it in there? Pardon? Now it should be fine, no? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, very good. So, the session before lunch was on volatility drivers and causes, so we were looking more at the past. Now we will try to do some looks into the future and to understand what could be future developments and the developments of drivers in particular. Let me just mention that this presentation is done by a lot of colleagues from the Joint Research Center in Seville and in Italy, as well as from the Technical University here in Madrid. Now, I will make a brief introduction on linking in a way what we have been talking about this morning and what is now going to happen, and then look at major sources of uncertainty in the medium run with a partial stochastic approach, a model which has been mentioned already, and then do something about climate change, and let's see how this influences market projections going in the direction of 2030. So we are really jumping ahead of the time. Now, having a look at past drivers, we have seen in the retrospective analysis of this morning that in particular a few drivers were important, but in general it's still a heterogeneous picture. Yeah, that's what we can observe. My colleagues Aicha Donmet and Emiliano, who is also around here, have been developing a Garch-Midas model which combines actually low and high frequency data. And what you can see now, you have the dark histogram that is a time from 86 to 2012 and the lighter blue one from 2006 to 2012. For the full sample, from 86 to 2012, we can see that in particular supply and demand factors are quite important, and then also some speculation proxies appear as very important, but then in the other sample, only going from 2006 to 2012, disappear. We should not overestimate results from this model, but nevertheless it gives some ideas, and it could be that indeed we are not anymore capturing what is happening on the financialization side. The stock-to-use ratio is very small. We have been discussing this in the morning, and maybe could talk about this later on, but as you know, we use sometimes proxies which might not reflect entirely what is happening in reality. So the questions we are asking ourselves now, which of the factors could play an important role for future price uncertainty? We have already difficulties to understand the price volatility in the past or price uncertainty. So for the future it's even worse. We have to create our data ourselves. We cannot use data sets, empirical data. Yeah? Another question, which commodities should we look at? Do higher prices imply higher volatility? Are biofuels a source of uncertainty? What could be the impact of climate change on prices with a horizon 2030? Now I would like to run briefly through these questions and present what we have been working so far. Just mention, I'd like to mention it's a research project, so don't expect final answers. We have heard about the agro-market model, which was not really praised this morning. Nevertheless, maybe we can enlighten a bit the way we are developing and using the model. And we are looking there more on the uncertainty aspect. And that is indeed part of the concept of volatility. With our simulations, so we look at price uncertainty in particular, and this is based on economic model features, so with specific behavioral functions, connections between markets, and many assumptions about the future. We should not forget about it. So no forecasts of the future uncertainty, but an indication of possible developments, not more. You could also call it a systematic sensitivity analysis. The methodology is well documented. I won't go into details, but just telling you that the determination of errors is based on historical data. Yeah, that's what we have to calculate the forecast error. Then we use specific softwares to create around 700 sets of alternative values for the stochastic terms, and then the agro-market model is run 700 times in order to produce uncertainty scenarios. And we use somehow the coefficient of variation as a measurement of uncertainty. This is also used for the DG Agri market outlook. We are collaborating very closely with the DG Agri colleagues. And here are some features of the agro-market model. Just to mention, it's a dynamic net trade partial equilibrium model, has a lot of agricultural and also processed commodities, many countries and regions, and what is, I think, the main feature, that it includes a lot of policies which are captured in detail. What can we say about general world market price uncertainty? Looking at the coefficient of variation, we can detect that we have a higher uncertainty or coefficient of variation for oil seeds, and somehow linked, maybe you would say, to biofuels, or the other way around. Some uncertainty concerning pork, protein meals, vegetable oils, coarse grains, and then less uncertainty for rice, poultry, and dairy products. What are the drivers behind? And just to tell you, we use about 120 different variables from macroeconomic and yield in order to understand what is driving it. Here you can see in particular that macroeconomic features, macroeconomic drivers are clearly determining the uncertainty. There are some products, for example oilseeds, where we have also concerning the yield uncertainty a quite strong influence. We don't say that weather does not play a role, not at all, but as our results indicate, we have a strong influence from the macroeconomic side. And this is even more difficult to read. But what you can see now is that we have, as we have seen before, also crude oil price, the exchange rate, GDP, consumer, as important drivers, but there is a big differentiation according to the commodities. Yeah? We should not forget that we, of course, cannot, let's say, foresee the future, because we are basing our work on the past results, past forecast errors. Now, if we look at one specific product, we try to follow a little bit the AMIS classification, and we were looking in our working paper on wheat, on coarse grains, and rice and oilseeds. Here I just show wheat, but you can see that there is a kind of logic behind and somehow reflecting also market reality. You see in the above graph the key players in the world market of wheat, yeah? And below you can see that on the yield side, these countries are also the ones which somehow demonstrate the highest uncertainty. A question we were asking ourselves and many others, how do biofuel mandates influence somehow uncertainty? What we tried is we abolished all mandates. So EU, US, Brazil, Argentina, Australia and Canada. And we see some adjustments of prices on the left-hand side. This is in euros. And you can see that the baseline value is around 140, and then it goes down to 105 maybe. For biodiesel and for bioethanol, we don't see a lot of changes. Yeah. What does it mean now for the uncertainty? If we look at the right-hand side, then we have again the coefficient of variation as an indicator for uncertainty, and it shows that we again for bioethanol we do not observe big changes, but for biodiesel indeed this is now rising. Nevertheless, we haven't seen a very clear transmission to the grain and oilseed markets on it. Yeah, that is something what we could not observe, but we would like to go into more details concerning these questions. Something else. Is there a link between price level and price uncertainty? I'm sure that some people have been working about it already, but we could not find a lot of it. That's why we made a scenario. We made a scenario with a higher wheat price. Yeah? Then if we look at the relative impact, so that means the coefficient of variation in 10 years, we do not see changes. Yeah? So baseline and then in the case of the baseline, in the case of the high wheat price scenario, not a lot changes. It even decreases slightly. However, when we look at the absolute numbers, and this is where we now take the range of between the 10th and 19th percentile prices of our simulations, there we can see that indeed the absolute numbers in euros, they rise a bit at least. Yeah? Not too much, but we can see that there are higher differences. And what could be the implications? Yeah, it could be, for example, that this has consequence in terms of expected inflation, or also has an influence of market signals to investors. Could be. We have to dig deeper. Now, having heard about the uncertainty, we progress some years more. We go to 2030. And we change models, we change methodologies, and also we are not dealing anymore with, let's say, a kind of systematic uncertainty analysis, but we have still the ambition to understand the fundamentals, and one of the fundamentals could be also climate change in the future. As a next step, in this research project, we would like to see how we can combine this. Now, what kind of models are we using? There is, on the one hand, the biophysical model WOFOST. This is part of the bioma modeling platform, which is hosted by our colleagues in the GRC ISPRA. And this model is simulating yield effects under alternative climate scenarios. And then we use these yield effects and induce them into the agroeconomic model CAPRI, which is a global, in order to calculate the global and EU-wide impacts on agri-food markets. That is a model which is run here in Madrid at the Technical University, but also in Seville and other places. What are the climate change scenarios? I won't stay along. We have Fabien here, who knows much better about it. Just to tell you that we choose two extreme scenarios have been chosen. You can see the Hadley one, a warm realization, and the ICAM one, a cold realization. There's a lot of work behind and can be explained if there are some questions later on, to tell you that it is covering the EU 27 member states, and data for yield changes at other places is coming from another source, and it delivers results on a 25 kilometer grid. You can see when we talk about 2030, the difference are not that big when we look at the radiative forcing. Nevertheless, it has some impact, and that's what I want to show you here. We have here the difference of the monthly averaged maximum air temperature in the mild scenario, and then the cold regionalization. It looks a bit different. I don't know what the colors mean exactly. You cannot read it, it's too small. But there are differences between the scenarios which have later on some impact on the yield. And if we look here on the precipitation, there we can also see quite some changes which go from dry areas in the eastern region into even more dry areas in the western region, and some more rainfall in the southern parts. So that could be good news for Spain. So that is now, what are the impacts on the yield? If we have a look here, we don't have to go into all details. We have 4 scenarios. Just to tell you, it is important also to take into account the carbon impact and also water limitation or not. Yeah. So here we have then different scenarios, and we can say, as a rule of thumb, in the mild CO2 and scenario with enough water, there we have positive yields, and in the other scenarios this is somehow decreasing, but exceptions are confirming the rule. Yeah. We plug this in the agricultural model and the Capri model, and then we can see all these nice maps with different colors. And we have on the left-hand side the mild scenario, and the other the colder scenario. And the story now, what I would like to make is the following: that we have here, let's say, the different wheat yields, and this is somehow transmitted in a logical way, reflected in the cereal production. We see here the changes from the baseline. The different categories are quite diverse. So we have, for example, under the red one, a range of 25 from -11 to -35. And we could debate a lot about all these numbers, but I think it gives an indication. And we have these strong regional differences. Now, when we 4 minutes, perfect, yeah. And if we include now the global effects, what you can see is that we have somehow increased productivity and production in other parts of the world, which then drive the prices up or down, because Europe is not isolated. It's clear, yeah. It's part of the global market, and then we can say that we have some larger price decreases, for example, in wheat or maize, because compared to the moderate production decrease, if you compare it, yeah, because of some low demand and supply elasticity. So that is the reason behind. Yeah. We have also trade between the regions. And now to come to the end of the story, what does it mean for income? Because that is also something what is quite important. And there we can say that that European agriculture income could moderately drop in the left-hand side scenario by about 4.5%, yeah, because the crop prices decrease more than offset by the productivity increases. I think that is a quite important message of this exercise. That means that we have not only a lot of variation between the regions and commodities, but also that the markets are connected, and that better yields in 2030 do not mean automatically higher income. We should always keep this in mind. We are talking about markets, and now, yeah, I think that is what I would like to tell about this slide. As mentioned, my colleagues can tell even more. What are somehow takeaway messages? But as it happens with takeaway food, be careful. Sometimes it's not what you expect. So also here, this is the findings of the current ongoing research. We have seen that main sources of price variability are crude oil prices and exchange rates, and of course also other variables play a role, as well as yield. This is somehow comparable to what we have seen in the short-term price volatility analysis, and according to our current state of analysis is reflected. We have seen that higher price levels might result in higher price uncertainty in absolute terms, not really in relative terms. Biofuel mandates might reduce uncertainty because of consumption obligations when we're talking about the biofuel of biodiesel and bioethanol. We could not see really that there's a strong price transmission, but there's much more work going on, and we have the crude oil price transmission, which might be even more important. There are many differences among commodities, and then we have seen that the biophysical and economic impacts of climate change are important, are sensitive to these uncertainties, and again we have in Europe many regional differences. So we cannot give you real answers, but a current state of research and some ideas where we have to dig deeper. We try to use the models we have at hand in our free time, more or less, in order to find some interesting answers to, or at least we try to understand better what is going on and combine, let's say, what happened in the past and what might be in the future. We have seen also some other approaches, and we are keen on learning more about it, and then maybe to improve altogether. In this way, thank you for your attention.